Have you ever stopped to think that the human mind can be both a prison and a key to unlocking secrets no one should know? Well, and before we begin, I ask you, have you subscribed to the channel yet? If not, take advantage now. It helps the content reach more people, and you won't miss any investigations like this. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that seems straight out of a nightmare. An ordinary man, Henrique, disappears without a trace after participating in hypnosis sessions. The detail? Nothing found makes sense, and the more we investigate, the more we realize that the truth can be more frightening than any lie. Many believe hypnosis is just a stage trick. Others swear it accesses hidden layers of the mind, capable of rewriting memories, implanting ideas, and even opening portals to something we don't understand. What if I told you this disappearance blends science, manipulation, and paranormal phenomena in a way that defies all explanation? Brace yourself. This isn't just another investigation, it's a dive into the darkest corners of the human mind, where reality and illusion coexist. And in the end, you might realize that the biggest question isn't what happened to Henrique, but rather, how far would you be willing to go to uncover the truth? Since I began my career as an investigator, I've realized that some mysteries can only be understood by looking beyond the surface. Hypnosis, for example, has always intrigued me. Originating centuries ago, it was seen both as a stage trick to entertain crowds and as a powerful technique for accessing hidden memories. I've been involved in cases where a simple trance completely changed a witness's version of events. The past teaches us that the mind can be even more dangerous than any weapon. In the 19th century, doctors and charlatans competed for space in crowded halls, using hypnosis as a spectacle. But amidst the laughter and applause, something much deeper was happening. People were reporting memories they would never remember in a conscious state. This fine line between science and illusion has always been fodder for controversy. And make no mistake, I've seen many lives shattered by someone who toyed with this dangerous boundary. While many believed hypnosis was just a show, others championed it as a therapeutic tool capable of healing trauma and physical pain. The truth? It's always been hidden somewhere in between. I've heard stories of people who, after sessions, remembered secrets that completely changed criminal investigations. The power of the mind, when accessed through these techniques, can open doors to frightening revelation. What few realize is that, just as a key opens a door, hypnosis can also open windows that should never be opened. And it was precisely at this point that I learned about the case of a man who mysteriously disappeared after a few sessions. It wasn't just another disappearance story, there was something dark lurking behind this ancient practice that still divides opinions today. The missing man's name was Henrique, a seemingly ordinary 38-year-old man. He worked as an accountant at a small company and led a methodical, almost predictable routine. But it's precisely in this type of profile that I tend to find the most disturbing secret. Henrique wasn't just numbers and spreadsheets. He carried a curious mind and, according to reports, a quiet fascination with the mysteries of the human mind. This detail would become crucial to what was to come. As I began investigating, I realized Henrique always sought to understand what lay beyond the obvious. Colleagues said he spoke of dreams, déjà vu, and experiences no one could explain. His family, however, described him as a reserved man, someone who kept much more than he revealed. And in my experience, when someone lives torn between routine and secrets, a disappearance is never just an accident. In the interviews I conducted, one thing became clear: Henrique possessed an inner restlessness. He seemed to carry a kind of emptiness, something no routine could fill. Many wonder how to identify this kind of feeling, but it's simple. It manifests itself in vacant looks, in the habit of jotting down enigmatic things in notebooks, or even in the sudden urge to radically change his life. Henrique had all these, and perhaps the most curious detail is that, shortly before he disappeared, he confided in a friend that he had discovered something during his hypnosis sessions. He didn't reveal what it was, but he assured them it would change everything. This phrase still echoes in my mind today, because in every case I've investigated, when someone claims to have discovered a profound truth, it's usually a harbinger that something much greater and dangerous is about to reveal itself. Henrique's hypnosis sessions were conducted in a discreet office located on the second floor of an old building downtown. The decor was strangely cozy, but with details that caused a certain discomfort: unlined paintings, a clock that never kept the correct time, and heavy curtains that blocked natural light. I was there, and I confess, even with all my experience, I felt a chill when I walked through that. It was as if the space had an energy of its own. The hypnotist in charge was named Dr. Alvaro, an enigmatic man with a calm voice and penetrating gaze. His reputation was controversial. Some considered him a genius capable of healing deep traumas, while others accused him of manipulating people for dark purposes. When I interviewed him, he seemed to measure every word as if hiding more than he said. I've dealt with many suspects like this, and I know that when silence weighs more than words, something dark is being concealed. The techniques used during the sessions also caught my attention. It wasn't just traditional relaxation and induction methods. There were chants, words in unfamiliar languages, and symbols scattered throughout the room. Henrique, according to reports, would enter a deep trance within minutes, answering questions he wouldn't remember later. This made me question how far science went from the occult. This mix always leads to dangerous places. Most disturbing, however, was discovering that Henrique emerged from the last few sessions altered. Friends report that he seemed to talk to himself, as if hearing voices no one else could hear. On one occasion, he even wrote nonsensical sentences on loose-leaf paper, as if receiving messages from something invisible. And it was precisely at this point that my investigation began to deepen, because I realized we were dealing with forces that transcended common logic. When talking to those close to Henrique, I realized they all had something in common: a certain discomfort when talking about him in the days leading up to his disappearance. A neighbor reported seeing him arriving late at night, his eyes fixed on the ground, and his steps unsteady, as if he wasn't fully conscious. Another acquaintance said Henrique began avoiding noisy places, preferring to remain silent for hours, simply observing. These seemingly trivial details become fundamental pieces of the puzzle. There was also a curious account from a coworker. She said that during a meeting, Henrique suddenly stopped writing and stared at the wall, muttering something inaudible. When they tried to call him, he didn't respond immediately, as if trapped in another reality. Situations like these, for those investigating, are like beacons in the darkness. They reveal something beyond what the naked eye can see. A childhood friend revealed that Henrique began talking about memories that didn't make sense, describing scenes from bygone eras, old clothes, and even the names of people no one knew. This kind of story resonates with me the most, because I've seen cases where the human mind has retrieved inexplicable memories. Some call them lapses of imagination, others access to past lives. Whatever the explanation, the fact is that Henrique was increasingly detached from everyday reality. And perhaps the most disturbing testimony came from his own sister. She said that the last time she saw him, he held her hands tightly and said, "If I don't come back, don't look for me." This kind of phrase doesn't come out of nowhere. It's like a password, a veiled farewell. To me, it was clear that Henrique knew he was approaching something dangerous, and every word spoken by those around him only reinforced the idea that greater forces were at play. As I delved behind the scenes of Henrique's life, I soon realized that family harmony was merely a facade. His father, a strict and meticulous man, always demanded absolute discipline. His mother, on the other hand, was quieter, but wore a look of fear whenever the subject of hypnosis came up. This contrast between authority and silence revealed open wounds within the household. As an investigator, I learned that home can be a minefield hidden behind smiles. I also discovered that Henrique had inherited old family debts, something he rarely discussed but which weighed heavily on his daily life. There were conflicts over the sale of a rural property, disputes with distant relatives, and even suspicions that some of the money had mysteriously disappeared. It wasn't just a financial drama, it was an emotional time bomb. Situations like these remind me of other cases where disappearances didn't begin in the doctor's office, but in the blood itself. Henrique's sister, the same one who heard his enigmatic phrase, confessed that he felt constantly pressured to be the family's balance. He was the one everyone demanded solutions from, but no one offered support. This overload, combined with curiosity for the unknown, created the perfect breeding ground for someone to seek refuge in practices like hypnosis. When the mind is exhausted, any promise of relief can turn into a trap. But what caught my attention most was a recent argument. Days before the disappearance, witnesses claim Henrique argued with a close relative about secrets from the past that shouldn't come to light. These words echoed throughout my investigation, like a warning. After all, in many of my cases, the greatest enemy isn't the stranger who appears from the outside, but rather the complicit silence maintained within the family. The further I delved, the more evident it became that Henrique's case wasn't just a run-of-the-mill disappearance. Witnesses reported that during the sessions, strange phenomena occurred in the environment. Lights flickered, objects shifted, and even the air seemed heavier. It wasn't the first time I'd heard something like this in my investigations. I've been in houses where the silence seemed to scream, and I confess that the sensation here was very similar. One of the most intriguing descriptions came from an employee of the office building. He reported that on certain nights, he would hear muffled voices even when the room was empty. Another person reported seeing shadows moving behind the curtains, even though he knew no one was inside. These accounts may seem exaggerated, but when added together, they form a pattern that cannot be ignored. The line between psychological and paranormal was becoming increasingly blurred. Henrique's own writings reinforced this point. In his notebook, I found notes about invisible presences and voices asking to be heard. He drew symbols repeatedly, always the same, as if trying to record something he saw beyond ordinary reality. Many would say it was a figment of his imagination, but I've learned that when different sources report the same thing, it's not just coincidence. It's as if something is truly trying to communicate. And it was at that moment that I began to question, could Henrique not simply be in a trance, but rather serving as a portal to something greater? This hypothesis may sound absurd, but in my career I've seen situations where the mind becomes a bridge to the inexplicable. The frightening thing is that once this bridge opens, it can't always be closed again. And this led me directly to the next thread of the investigation, where manipulation and mystery intertwine in an even more dangerous way. In many cases I've investigated, hypnosis has been presented as a therapeutic tool, but it's no secret that it can also be used as a form of manipulation. Henrique seemed to have become vulnerable to the point of blindly trusting Dr. A. This imbalance worried me. When someone surrenders their mind to another, they are also surrendering their own will. I've seen witnesses swear to things they would never say in their full consciousness. This isn't just science, it's power. Mind control, even partial, can transform an ordinary man into someone capable of unthinkable things. Think of a puppet that believes it moves of its own free will. That's exactly what happens when manipulation is well executed. Henrique began to change his attitudes, break old habits, and adopt behaviors that made no sense to those who knew him. His every step seemed dictated by an invisible voice, and this to me was the clearest sign of external control. During my investigation, I found accounts from other patients of Dr. Alvaro, who also spoke of drastic changes in their lives. One man suddenly left his family, a woman began having identity crises, and there were even those who claimed to have memories of places they'd never been. These patterns were no coincidence. What appeared to be therapy, in practice, sounded like psychic control experiments. It was impossible to ignore the similarity to techniques used in secret cults I've investigated. What if Henrique had discovered, in the midst of this process, something he shouldn't have? This question haunted me night after night. Perhaps he realized he wasn't just accessing memories, but being led to create new realities, fabricated by someone else's mind. When the line between memory and suggestion is erased, any truth can be written anew. And it was at this point that the plot became even darker, leading me to the trail of his final day. Reconstructing Henrique's final hours was like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle, whose pieces seemed to refuse to fit together. According to records, he left home early, wearing a gray suit and carrying only a leather briefcase. He stopped by work but didn't stay until the end of the day, unusual for someone so methodical. Security cameras showed him leaving at 3:42 p.m., with a tense expression as if carrying an invisible weight. Afterward, Henrique was spotted at a nearby coffee shop where he ordered only black coffee and stared blankly into space. The waitress reported that he seemed to be in a trance, stirring his coffee without drinking it, as if waiting for someone who never arrived. Details like these fascinate me, because they reveal the contrast between routine and rupture. Suddenly, a methodical man loses himself in gestures that don't match his personality. It was like watching his mind disconnect from his body. Later, a friend claimed to have received a quick call from Henrique. He spoke softly, almost whispering, and simply said, "They know." When the friend asked, "Who?" the line went dead. This kind of cryptic message isn't a coincidence in cases like this. It's always a code, a desperate attempt to leave clues before it's too late. I'd seen this same pattern in other disappearance investigations. The last confirmed image of Henrique was captured on a security camera, walking toward Dr. Alvaro's building, that same night. No footage shows him leaving. It's as if he'd entered and dissolved into thin air. And here's the detail that never leaves my mind. At the exact moment Henrique crossed the street to his office, the lights on the entire block flickered. To some, a power outage, to me a harbinger of something much bigger about to happen. During the initial search, police found Henrique's leather briefcase abandoned in the lobby of the building where the hypnosis sessions took place. Inside, There were no work documents, just loose sheets of paper with incomprehensible scribbles and repeated symbols. Among the papers, a sealed envelope caught my attention, empty inside, but with circular markings as if it had contained something important. This detail intrigued me more than any concrete clue. Another find was his wristwatch, carefully left on the office desk. Curiously, the hand was stuck at exactly 9:07 p.m., a time that coincided with a reported power outage that night. I've seen this kind of synchronicity before, and I always wonder coincidence or intentional mess. Henrique wasn't a careless man, so leaving the watch there seemed more like a message than an oversight. There was also a portable recorder hidden in the briefcase's inside pocket. When analyzed, it revealed only static for several minutes, but amidst the hissing, I heard something like rapid breathing, followed by a whisper, "It's not me speaking." This audio sent chills down my spine. The rational mind tries to explain it away as interference, but in investigations like this, I learned that some things defy logic. The tape seemed to be another fragment of an invisible puzzle. Finally, a small key was found in Henrique's coat pocket. None of the family members could identify which lock it belonged to. I held it in my hands and had the feeling it wasn't just an object but an invitation. I've experienced cases where a simple key led to hiding places, safes, and even secret rooms. At that moment, I understood that objects not only revealed clues but seemed to whisper that the story was far from over. Dr. Alvaro has always been a figure shrouded in controversy. In old archives, I found records of complaints filed by former patients who claimed to have lost entire days of memory after sessions. Others claimed to have developed strange behaviors, such as speaking languages they had never studied or writing symbols with no apparent meaning. What struck me most was that almost all of the complaints mysteriously disappeared from the courts, as if something larger was covering their history. I spoke with his colleagues, and some described him as a brilliant professional, a pioneer in regression technique, but others saw him as a charismatic manipulator, capable of bending people's will with just a look. I've worked on similar cases, men who, under the guise of scientists, hid far from academic interest. Alvaro reminded me exactly of this profile, someone who uses trust as a weapon and transforms human vulnerability into a laboratory for experiments. During one of my searches, I came across an academic article he wrote, published in a little-known journal. The text discussed doors of the mind and suggested that hypnosis could be used to cross space-time barriers. Reading those pages, I realized that Henrique wasn't the first to venture into this dangerous terrain, but perhaps he was the one who went too far. When science and mysticism mix, the consequences are rarely predictable. Most disturbing, however, was discovering that 2 other patients of Dr. Alvaro had also disappeared years earlier, under circumstances that were never clarified. The cases were treated as voluntary escapes, but the similarity to Henrique's was striking. It's impossible for me to ignore this pattern. What if Alvaro wasn't just a controversial therapist, but rather the centerpiece of something much darker? This question prompted me to analyze the police evidence. The first official inspection of the office revealed details that seemed trivial, but together screamed for attention. The internal cameras were turned off the very night Henrique disappeared, something that had never happened before. Alvaro's computer contained recently deleted files, as if someone was trying to clean up their tracks. I've encountered this kind of situation before. The more thorough the cleaning, the more obvious the presence of. On the office floor, forensic experts found circular marks, as if heavy furniture had been recently dragged. Curiously, the doctor claimed he hadn't made any changes. To me, this kind of contradiction fuels suspicion. I've seen criminals try to hide secret rooms or compromising objects simply by moving furniture around. Every detail was a poorly rehearsed play that revealed more than it hid. Another important point was the analysis of Henrique's cell phone. Over the past 48 hours, he had received cryptic messages from an unknown number, containing only short phrases. "Are you ready? Don't turn back. Today will be the day." The messages were deleted but recovered by forensics. Reading them gave me a chill, because it didn't just seem like a reminder, it sounded like a command. It was as if someone was guiding Henrique to the abyss. Finally, a partial fingerprint found on Henrique's leather briefcase didn't match anyone officially present at the scene. It wasn't from family members, nor from the doctor himself. This detail alerted me, as it indicated the presence of a third person. Behind the scenes of criminal investigations, it's this hidden figure who often holds the key to the enigma. And it was precisely from this point on that a psychological analysis of the case became inevitable. As I delved deeper into Henrique's psychological profile, I realized he wasn't just a man curious about the mind. He was someone desperately searching for answers to his own emptiness. Many people believe hypnosis is merely entertainment, but in practice, it can open up deeply buried inner wounds. Henrique, by submitting himself to such intense sessions, may have awakened repressed memories he wasn't prepared to face. I've seen this happen before, and the effects are often devastating. During interviews, family members reported that he began experiencing anxiety attacks and severe insomnia. He would spend sleepless nights, mumbling incoherent sentences, as if talking to someone invisible. To an investigator, these signs are clear indications of an emotional breakdown, but the detail is that in Henrique's case, the breakdown seemed induced, not spontaneous. It was as if hypnosis had removed the restraints on his mind, leaving him vulnerable to any suggestion. Another point that caught my attention was the possibility of false memories. Hypnosis, when poorly administered, can implant memories that never existed. Henrique recounted strange places, dangerous situations, and even encounters with people he'd never met. Whether this was the result of manipulation or the result of real trauma, we'll never know for sure, but the impact on his sanity was evident. When the mind loses its sense of reality, any path can lead to and it is precisely here that the most disturbing question arises. Was Henrique running from something real or from the creations of his own mind? In many cases I've investigated, the psychological and the paranormal walk hand in hand, as if they were two mirrors reflecting each other. And it was this duality that opened the way for the most disturbing hypothesis of all, that unseen forces might be involved in his disappearance. In my career I've heard many stories that defied logic, but the theories that emerged about Henrique surpassed them all. Some believed he had opened a portal during a hypnotic trance, allowing something we don't understand to pass through. Others spoke of entities that feed on mental energy and, once awakened, prevent their victims from returning to ordinary life. It's curious how the human mind, in seeking answers, ends up creating new questions. One detail that strengthened this hypothesis was the description of voices. People reported hearing Henrique talking to someone who wasn't present, as if responding to invisible instructions. In one of the notebooks found, he wrote, "They want me to cross." This simple phrase carries enormous weight in a case like this. For some, it was psychological delusion. For others, it was clear proof that the paranormal had entered the scene. Theories also emerged that Henrique didn't just disappear but was taken. Some paranormal researchers have pointed to similarities with abduction accounts, in which the victim returns with no memories or, in some cases, never returns at all. The lack of physical traces reinforced this line of thinking. After all, disappearing without a trace is something that defies even the most advanced methods of criminal investigation. I confess that, as a researcher, I've learned not to rule out any possibility. I've witnessed situations where conventional explanations simply didn't cut it. Henrique's case reminded me of just that. The feeling that we were facing something beyond human comprehension. And as these theories grew, new, even more intriguing elements emerged. Dreams and visions that couldn't be ignored. Shortly after Henrique's disappearance, people close to him began reporting strangely vivid dreams. His sister said she dreamed of him in a dark room, calling for help but unable to get close. A friend claimed to have seen Henrique in the middle of a deserted field, repeating the phrase, "I can't go back." As an investigator, I've learned that these dreams can simply be a reflection of the trauma, but in some cases, they feel like messages that penetrate invisible barriers. While analyzing his notebooks, I realized that Henrique also wrote down descriptions of dreams before he disappeared. He spoke of endless corridors, doors that never opened, and faceless figures watching him. These accounts caught my attention because they coincided with the visions family members began having after his disappearance. The synchronicity between what he described and what others dreamed later didn't seem to be a coincidence. It was as if they were all connected by the same invisible thread. Some acquaintances even claimed to feel Henrique's presence in their homes, as if a shadow were passing through the hallways at night. In my research, whenever multiple people report similar experiences, I tend to consider this a pattern worthy of attention. Perhaps it was the result of collective suggestion, perhaps something much more. The line between imagination and reality, in this case, seemed to blur with each new account. The most intriguing part was when a neighbor said she dreamed of Henrique handing her a key. The thing is, she described the object perfectly, even before I publicly revealed that a key had been found among her belongings. This kind of coincidence cannot be ignored. And it was from these visions that the investigation took an unexpected turn, raising the hypothesis that perhaps we weren't dealing with a simple disappearance, but rather a carefully orchestrated kidnapping. At a certain point in the investigation, a hypothesis gained traction. What if Henrique's disappearance had nothing paranormal about it, but was, in fact, a well-planned kidnapping? The lack of signs of a struggle didn't rule out this possibility. On the contrary, it could indicate that he was induced to leave voluntarily, perhaps through hypnosis. I've worked on cases where the victim was psychologically manipulated to the point of blindly following instructions, as if following an invisible script. The cryptic messages on his cell phone reinforced this line of reasoning. "Are you ready? Today will be the day." Phrases that resembled commands, almost like instructions for an operation. If Henrique was a pawn in a larger game, it's possible he was taken to a secret location, away from the eyes of the police. The key found among his belongings may have a direct link to this hiding place. In criminal underworlds, nothing is left to chance. Each object usually carries a veiled message. Another clue suggesting kidnapping was the testimony of a taxi driver. He claimed to have driven a man matching Henrique's description that night, but said he wasn't alone. A serious-looking, cold-tempered individual accompanied him, giving him all the instructions about his destination. Strangely, the taxi driver never remembered this passenger's. This gap in my memory raised the suspicion that perhaps it wasn't just a trivial detail but part of something calculated. The kidnapping in this case would not only be physical but also mental. If Henrique was taken against his will, it may have been through psychological manipulation, turning him into an unwitting accomplice in his own disappearance. This hypothesis, as bleak as it may seem, opens the way for new questions. Who was behind such mental engineering? And most importantly, what was at the place where Henrique was last seen? The answer seemed hidden in the crime scene itself. Returning to the building where Henrique was last seen was like entering a stage after the play had ended. The objects remained, but the air seemed permeated by something invisible. The narrow corridor, lit by yellowish bulbs, had signs of water infiltration on the walls, and the silence was almost suffocating. Every detail of the space seemed to hold a secret. I've learned that in these places, even emptiness speaks louder than words. Dr. Alvaro's office was at the end of the hallway, protected by a heavy wooden door. Upon entering, the feeling of discomfort was immediate. Antique furniture, curtains that blocked the outside light, and a lingering smell of cheap incense. The room conveyed both a refuge and a prison. In my experience, places like these aren't chosen by chance, they're designed to control the perception of those who enter. In the corner of the room stood a worn armchair, where Henrique usually lay during session. Around it, marks on the floor suggested objects had been recently dragged, possibly to hide something. When I touched the wood near the wall, I noticed a strange vibration, as if there were an empty space behind it. I've seen cases where secret compartments held much more than simple documents. That possibility haunted me for days. But the most disturbing detail was the atmosphere itself. It wasn't just psychological. Witnesses reported feeling dizzy and chills after staying in the place for too long. I myself felt the pressure in the air, as if I were being watched by invisible eyes. There, the line between crime and the supernatural seemed to dissolve. And it was precisely in this charged atmosphere that I found the clues that would lead to one of the investigation's biggest twists. Just when I thought I'd explored every possible avenue, a discovery completely changed the course of the case. In a locked drawer in the office, I found a diary that by all appearances belonged to Henry. It described the sessions in detail, but what struck me most was the gradual shift in the tone of the notes. It began as scientific curiosity and ended as a desperate account of someone who felt persecuted by voices that wouldn't shut up. Besides the diary, even more intriguing evidence emerged. A cassette recording, likely forgotten during Dr. Alvaro's cleansings. In the audio, Henrique described a sensation of being pulled out of his body while the hypnotist's voice repeated phrases in a language I couldn't identify. The desperation in his breathing was real, unmistakable. This tape, for me, confirmed that there was much more at play than alternative therapy. Another twist came when I discovered that Henrique had transferred a considerable sum of money to an unknown account just days before disappearing. This could indicate a planned escape, but the curious thing was that the amount corresponded precisely to old family debts, as if he had decided to settle a lifelong debt. This gesture, enigmatic in itself, raised the question: was he preparing his departure, or did he know he wouldn't return? But nothing struck me as much as the diary's last page. Henrique wrote, "If I cross, there will be no return. They await me on the other side." These words, laden with mystery, made me feel like I wasn't just investigating a crime, but a journey into something we can't explain. It was as if Henrique had purposefully left a final message, opening the door to new interpretations, and inevitably, to the media pressure that would soon follow. When the press learned of the case, everything took on unexpected proportions. Sensational headlines splashed across newspapers and websites. Man disappears after hypnosis, paranormal experiment, or perfect crime. Every TV channel featured experts offering conflicting opinions, and public opinion was divided between those who saw Henrique as a victim and those who believed he had simply run away. I've dealt with the media on other cases, and I know they can be both helpful and detrimental. The controversy spread quickly. Medical associations began to question Dr. Alvaro's ethics, while spiritualist groups claimed the disappearance was evidence of forces beyond science. I received countless anonymous messages, some offering valuable information, others simply trying to scare me. Whenever a case gains notoriety, there are those who want to contribute and those who want to manipulate the narrative. It was difficult to separate truth from rumor. The most curious thing was how the story sparked social debate. On online forums, people reported their own experiences with hypnosis, some positive, others frightening. Some said it reminded them of childhood traumas, and others swore they had seen inexplicable things during trance. Henrique's case thus became more than an investigation. It became a mirror of our own relationship with the mind, faith, and the unknown. But while the media built theories and fueled controversy, I knew the truth lay in details that couldn't be ignored. I've learned that external noise often only serves to drown out the most important whispers. And it was precisely in this whirlwind of opinions and headlines that a new clue led me to consider an ending as unexpected as it was disturbing. Despite all efforts, Henrique's body was never found. For some, this meant only one thing: he was dead. For others, it was proof that he had crossed some kind of invisible boundary, physical or mental, from which he could not return. This lack of a clear outcome is what is most intriguing in a case like this. After all, what hurts more, the certainty of loss, or the eternal doubt about what really happened? At one point, rumors surfaced that Henrique had been seen in neighboring towns, always walking alone, with a lost look in his eyes and disheveled clothing. None of these sightings could be confirmed. However, I've seen in other investigations how these shadows of the missing man can emerge, like echoes of an unresolved story. Whether coincidence or truth, these reports only deepened the mystery. Some believe he is still alive, trapped in some deep trance, unable to distinguish reality from illusion. Others argue that Henrique was taken, and that the key found among his belongings is evidence of a portal never understood. There is no definitive answer, only fragments that leave the case open to interpretation. It's as if each person chooses the version that most fuels their own fears and beliefs. And perhaps that's precisely what makes this disappearance so disturbing. It doesn't close a cycle, it simply opens up infinite possibilities. As an investigator, I've learned to deal with inconclusive endings, but I've never gotten used to them. Henrique's case remains in my mind like a half-open door, never revealing what lies beyond. And it's in this unsettling silence that my own reflection on the boundaries between science, mind, and mystery. Throughout my career, I've learned that the human mind is simultaneously one's greatest ally and one's worst enemy. In Henrique's case, I saw clearly how fragile boundaries can be shattered when we venture into little understood territories, such as hypnosis. The search for answers can lead us into labyrinths from which there's no escape. Truth, sometimes, is more dangerous than ignorance. I often say that each case leaves an invisible mark on me, like scars that cannot be seen but are carried. Henrique wasn't just a missing person, he became a symbol of what happens when we cross lines without considering the consequence. Whether it's manipulation, paranormal activity, or sheer psychological fragility, the fact is that his mystery resonates as a warning: don't underestimate the power of the mind. In conversations with other people I've researched, I've noticed a pattern. Everyone, at some point, believed they'd found the key to understanding the inexplicable. But what we call a key is often just the door to something greater, something beyond our control. Henrique left clues, but he also left questions that may never be answered, and it's precisely in this space of doubt that the power of his story lies. If there's one lesson I take away from this case, it's that not everything needs to be explained to be real. Sometimes the absence of answers is precisely what gives meaning to the search. Henrique remains a shadow in the past, but his story lives on, reminding us all that there are realms of the mind and the invisible that perhaps we shouldn't explore. And yet, there will always be someone willing to walk through the door. Ultimately, Henrique's disappearance reveals something disturbing. Sometimes the human mind holds secrets more dangerous than any external enemy, and the big question remains, to what extent do you trust your own memory? Is what you remember truly what happened, or could it have been shaped, manipulated, and reconstructed without you even realizing it? I want you to think about this. How many times in your life have you believed something that you later discovered wasn't true? How many decisions have you made based on convictions that may have been just illusions? These questions may seem uncomfortable, but they hold the key to seeing beyond the obvious. And tell me, if you were in Henrique's shoes, would you have the courage to participate in a hypnosis session, knowing the risks, or would you prefer to keep your shadows hidden, never awakening them? Leave your opinion in the comments, because I really want to know how far you would go in this search for the truth. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell and leave a like. This way you can continue following other investigations as mysterious and provocative as this one. After all, the unknown will always lurk, and together we can face every shadow that appears along the way.